the fishes, the reptiles, the mammals that lived, and the birds. And this was a wonderland behind us here, where Adrian Gardner has started his work. He's doing a superb thing. He's buying up these farms, and he's allowing nature to recover what once belonged to her. And he is helping the area by reintroducing its original species, which can still be found as far afield as the Kruger and other places. And he's reintroducing them into the land which originally belonged to them. They are the original tenants, even before the Ngunis came here. The time of the Bushmen, they were here. Before there were any Xhosas, any whites, any Indians, any Chinese in the land, they were here. And nobody gives them much thought to them. Well, obviously there are exceptions on my right and my left, but what he is doing is something which should be copied. I mean, there are a few other examples of this, whereby people just buy farms and form game ranches. Well, that's better than farming domestic animals, because cattle and sheep were not meant for Africa in the first place. There wasn't a single goat, sheep, or cow in Africa 5,000 years ago. They were introduced by humans, and they have done about as much damage to this remarkable continent as humans have, in toto. Now, any movement against this massive trend, this avalanche of development and agriculturalization, is a movement in the right direction. And it may not carry many votes, it may not carry much support, but the people who do this work should indeed be admired. And here is a scheme which cannot make any money. At the very best it can break even, and you'll be very lucky, Mr. Gardner, not to lose a great deal of money doing this. But it's not money really lost, because money, what is money, except in terms of what it enables somebody to do? And in that sense, he's putting his resources to excellent work. He's going to, this area, though naturally, 200 years ago, was a wonderland for wild game and wild nature, is now reduced to pockets, and it's very poor in game parks. And we've got the Addo, which is indeed a fine park, but a very small one. And there are a few other reserves here and there in this part of the world. So it badly needs, even from the human angle, it needs to reserve museums, if you like, of nature, to show the numerous human inhabitants of the land what it was once like and how beautiful it was, and the relevance of all those species in the ecosystem in which they evolved. And there he is doing something very difficult, very expensive. He cannot benefit from it, as far as I can see, other than the greatest benefit of all, which is the natural satisfaction he'll get in his inner spirit for doing something which is an impulse with him and an instinct. And he should be helped in every way by all the local officials. They should not stand in his way, and I'm sure they're not. They're obviously helping him to the maximum degree that they can, because in these days of permits, and in these days of officialdom and concessions and bureaucracy, sometimes that can be a handicap. But here, I'm sure it will be very popular even with the inhabitants, the local inhabitants, because they will have somewhere to go where they can see how wonderful it all used to be. And I've seen the work he's doing, and already he's had these properties 4 or 5 years. The forest, the original bush is regenerating, the original grasses are returning, the animals are beginning to breed, and you're soon going to have a park there as beautiful as the Addo. And that will be a wonderful benefit for everyone, and all the inhabitants of the area, human or otherwise.
Do you care to mention any specific animals?
Well, yes, I mean, I've already seen springbok here, black and also the natural color. I've seen plenty of bushbuck there. We've seen also, I see there's some bontebok and elephant have been reintroduced, 17 elephant. Black rhino have been introduced. This was all their natural land, I have to add. This all belonged to them 200 years ago. There were numerous there. They're all coming back. They have to be now collected, bought and transported at vast expense. But nonetheless, it's wonderful to see them. I saw yesterday the elephant and the rhino, and a white rhino with its calf just bred there, the black rhino just bred there. This is all a miracle if it is allowed to happen in the way that its progenitor dreams it will happen. And Dr. Ian Player, who is probably the greatest South African wildlife conservationist, certainly outside South Africa he's the most celebrated of all. because of the work that he's done, not necessarily what he says, which is also worth listening to, but his actual work. He actually persuaded me to come and see this here. I'm very glad I did come up. I spent the night there, spent yesterday and today going around and seeing Shamwari Park.
How do you see your further involvement in this particular project?
Well, I'm an old man, probably the oldest person in the room, and I have limited energy and limited resources. And I live in another country. My involvement in Africa is very sentimental. I love Africa for its wilderness, and I love Africa for some of its indigenous peoples as well. It's well known. I mean, I come here. I have a house in the Cape, and when I'm in South Africa, about 2 or 3 months a year, I always visit with my wife and my friends various parks. Dr. Ian Player takes us to beautiful parks in northern KwaZulu, like the Ndumu, and in Natal, of course, like Hlui. We go up to the Skeleton Coast every year, and to the remotest places. And I'm involved in that sense, but I'm not doing much out here other than restore 750 acres of land behind my house in the Cape, which I've made into a fynbos reserve and has some animals of its own. My main work in Africa is in the Congo Brazzaville, where I have a gorilla orphanage, and we're going to return those gorillas to the wild in October or November this year. You'll probably see it on your screens and read about it in your papers when and if it ever happens, and nobody's ever tried to do that before, and we hope to succeed in that.
What is, with your experience of reserves of this nature around the world, what does Shamwari need to survive?
Well, but what
does it need?
Shamwari needs is Adrian Gardner. And it needs his, I've only known him for 24 hours, but I get the very strong impression that his heart is in his work. And any money I've ever made in my life, and I made little money in my time, has all been expended on protection of wild nature. He is moving very fastly in that direction. I think he's probably ruined himself by this. But nonetheless, that would be a good ruin, because if he leaves behind him Shamwari, there's no greater monument than that. To protect it 25 or 35 or eventually probably 40 de grandeur, maybe 50,000 acres, he has to buy the land, he has to restore, he's restored all the farmsteads on it too, some of them very old, 100 years old. I've seen the work, it's beautifully done. What recompense does he have, other than the satisfaction of going around in his Range Rover and seeing herds of Bleesbok, Bontebok, Bushbuck, and he will no doubt introduce lion and leopard, or reintroduce them, I should say, because they were all there originally, and the birds and everything start to prosper and find a safe haven, no poaching. He spends a lot of money protecting it, fences, 70 kilometers, he told me, of fences he's built. We know that's not cheap. And he's done it all, and I don't think he'll ever break even. His dream is to break even. Well, my dream was once to break even. Never happened to me. I lost tens of millions. But I'm very happy I spent my money that way. How else could I have spent it?
What about tourism and Shamwari? Do you think?
Well, yes, tourism, you see, excellent and all that, tourism. Now, the thing is that if he creates for these wild beasts what they need, that's his priority, then you'll find that people will want to come and see the wonder. And then his lodge will fill up and he, get a little bit of revenue to help him. But it's a wonderful thing that it's possible for people in these parts to not only have the Addo, which does excellent work, I have to say. I visited there, of course, before. I've been to the Addo before, and I went there yesterday. But they'll have an alternative, because his is different from the Addo. Though it's very nearby, it has 5 or 6 different ecospheres, all in this one park. It's rather remarkable in that sense, which gives it the possibility of possibly protecting more wild creatures, more species, than more or less any other 25,000 acres in this part of the world. A very important fact, that. It's not just one. You could have 50,000 acres of the Namib Desert, but only protect 41 species. I mean, here, the 200 species of bird alone that are going there, live there, or migrate there.
Mr. Espen, I know your interest in humans is secondary to you. Were you pleased to see, with your close links to the Zulus. Were you pleased to see the IFP coming into this election at a very late stage?
Well, I'm afraid I'm terribly blunt. That's why I'll never be a politician. I have mixed feelings when they came into the election. I believe in my intuition and my gut rather than my brain. I have a very indifferent brain. But my instincts are usually sound, and I had a sick feeling in my stomach when Chief Buthelezi made the decision that he did at the last minute. That, of course, I realize is a very unpopular thought out here, but I'm not interested in your popularity. I like to be hated. It's a sign that I'm doing something good.
Why were you disappointed then?
Because you see, you've got to understand, the magic word today, particularly in South Africa, there are certain voodoo words. Democracy is one. It's a voodoo word. Education is another. Children are another. Human rights are another. These are voodoo words, magical words, which if we'd heard early Nguni chiefs talk about them, missionaries and so on, would have said that what a world they live in, a voodoo. We live in a voodoo world. Now, the traditional Zulu nation that Chief Buthelezi and the king represent, there may only be half the Zulu nation. Maybe it's only a few million. But to me, they are the ones that have to be protected against the encroachments of civilization. Because everyone thinks that they're inferior because some of them can't read. In my view, that's probably an advantage. The great mammals that I admire can't read. Gorillas can't read, and I know that they're superior to us. There isn't any doubt in my mind they're a superior primate to ourselves. The fact that a man can't put his name on a form means his vote is worth more, not less, because he hasn't been manipulated by Western culture and education and Western religions. Don't you see that it's there in the grass, in the fields, that the true nature of our species can be found still? This should be preserved like gold dust. And the power of the Zulu nation, the traditional nation, was not represented in numbers of votes. I mean, the cephalogy of voting, where you count so many votes and he's got less, so you have the tyranny of the majority. Well, that is my definition of democracy today, particularly in Africa, is the tyranny of the majority. And that is what you have to be careful of here. But there's nothing more heady than a majority. It feels then it has the right to do anything, particularly to crush its hereditary enemies and those that once threatened it. So therefore I'm concerned for the traditional Zulu nation, which I admire and have studied for 40 or 50 years. Well, I've been in constant flow of information to and fro for years and years with Ulundi. And yes, I mean, I'm a partisan. Now, you mustn't read I'm not a political commentator by profession, but I'm a partisan of the traditional Zulu people. And they need a few partisans because the general trend of liberal opinion is against them. Here you have a liberal avalanche of opinion. The whole of the media here, including most of yourselves, are completely rubber-stamped. You have to say certain things, or if you don't have to, you better learn fast. Otherwise, you won't be saying anything. You'll be silenced. And therefore, I mean, I speak out. I don't care if there's an umkhonto through my heart by a political enemy. It doesn't worry me. I mean, I have a house here. It might be burned down. I mean, anything can happen, but I would say what I think. And I admire not just traditional Zulus. I admire traditional, uncorrupted African peoples who have interred within them more wisdom put together than nearly all us modern infiltrators into Africa. I don't despise them, I admire them. They were, as Dr. Blair will confirm, because he's lived all his life and his 6 generations in this country, when the white man came here, there was a sort of balance between nature and man, which we've just destroyed. I mean, he has saved the whole species virtually single-handed, though he'd always denied he's done it single-handed. Of course, he had people to help him. But the white rhino. Now, there were millions of these white rhino here, and black rhino, and other species, and they lived in harmony, or relative harmony, with the original inhabitants of this land. We've come and wrecked all this. Now, those people that can go back and listen, you know, history in traditional Zululand is the distrust written history of their people. But who wrote it? Their conquerors, the white men. All the English wrote the history of the nation that they subdued and broke and conquered. Now, you go to the old men whose grandsires fought with Chaka or Dingiswayo or Zwide. You go and speak to them and they've had it handed down orally. That oral culture is superior to our written word. It carries more truth than the written word. That's the amazing thing people don't understand. They despise somebody who can't write. He lives in an oral culture. Well, I have to tell you that our ancestors, until a few thousand years ago, literally in some cases, even 800 years ago, my ancestors were all illiterate. We lived in an oral culture. That oral culture carries the truths. And the real history of those people is not as has been written by anyone, not even pro-Zulu English writers like Ritter, who wrote Shaka Zulu, like The Washing of the Spears by Morris. Even these writers don't know the truth of what happened. And therefore, I feel that they have been disadvantaged by the influx of culture, foreign culture, and the technosphere. Now, the traditional people do not handle the technosphere as cleverly as industrialized people, urbanized people. Now, the modern concept is that urbanized people living in cities have education, have religion, modern religion, have wisdom. And the people living in the country are sort of backward and don't know too much. It's there I would go for advice. I would go and ask if I had problems. I would ask some old wise in Nyanga or Ngoma. I would ask them. I wouldn't go to a psychiatrist. I mean, that's where the wisdom lies. And I'm sure Dr. Blair here would go along with me with that. I mean, he gained more from his old Zulu friend, Makubu, the wisest man he ever met in his life. He said he learned more from this man than from his entire education. Now, that's all under threat if these people all become imprinted with our own Europeanized technospherical culture. Very hard deal from history. To have the imperial Zulu power in the north. As you know, they scattered the Tembu, which was Nelson Mandela's clan. They came down, crushing Matawani, the Ngwani chief, Mantatisi, and Bakwatla, and so on. And then they have the whites in the south coming up, river by river, and what the so-called 12 Kaffir Wars. I mean, they were in the middle. And the Xhosa are very clever people, and they're very politically astute people. And in many ways, in some ways anyway, they have advantage over their Zulu cousins, who are also of the Nguni stock. Whereas the Zulu is a simpler fellow. He's not as sophisticated as the Xhosa, and never was. And but I don't like to see. I mean, today political sophistication is the weapon, and political manipulation of the media, and so on. These are the weapons that win wars. The poor old Zulus, they fought the English down to the last man. Even in 1906, 3,000 of them were massacred in the Bambata Rebellion. They were the only black race down here which put up that kind of resistance, and for this they were severely punished, because the Soto never really fought, certainly not in the later days of Moshesh, and they got Lesotho. The Ovambo never really fought the Germans. The Herero did what happened. The Ovambo all survived, and the Germans exterminated half the Herero, so now the Ovambo rule Namibia, a huge independent state. The Swana never fought at all. They never fought the Europeans. They got Botswana, the size of France and rich to boot. The Swazis, closely related to the Zulus, they never fought the English. And they got Swaziland. And yet the greatest nation of them all down here, both in numbers and in temperament and in pride and in virtue. Yes, I mean all these things. They fought as they should have done to protect the graves of their ancestors in the heartland. And what happened to them? They got nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Dutch and the English took all their farms without payment, took their best lands. KwaZulu today is just a lot of rocks in the hills. I've traveled it several times. It's, where you get poor land where goats can hardly breathe, there you have KwaZulu. The rich sugar plantations in the valleys belong to the whites. Where the grass is that high, white men's cattle roam. The Zulus themselves got nothing. So they're an injured people. Like the Xhosas, they have their own feeling that they've been hard done by. So, I mean, there is a case. I'm here in the heart of Xhosa land. the Transkei to the north and the Ciskei to the south, on all the right, and they're the great dominant tribe today, so it seems, in South Africa. But nonetheless, that doesn't alter my loyalty to my early love, the traditional Zulu people.
Is not the possibility of repression still the same, whether they took part in the election or not?
Well, it's a complicated political question.
I'm not into politics, but it just occurs to me that...
well, that's where you're landing me.
I didn't bring the subject up.
Look, don't be on the defensive. I'm the one who should be on the defensive here. Now, it's very hard to say what the traditional Zulus I'm talking about here, because of course the southern Zulus, you have to remember, are partly married into the Pondos, and they were the groups that fled from the Zulu kings historically and took refuge at Port Durban with the English and got the protection. You know, in the Zulu War, there were many Zulus who fought against the old kingdom, and they were the detribalized Zulus in the south under the protection of the white men. So there's always been this cleavage among the Zulu people. It's not a modern political phenomenon, that's north and the south. It's always been like that. And also in the south, they married into the Pondos and the Xhosas. They married into the Xhosas in the south. And so they're not the same as the pure Zulu of the north. He still remains the old Zulu. And it's to him that my sentiment is attached and my instinct is attached. And how can he survive in the modern world? Only by rallying around the traditional things, his king, his chiefs, his leaders, and to gain the inspiration of the world through his virtue, of his character. Now, they're very dependable, reliable people, the traditional Zulus. Anybody who's ever employed them, you can confirm that without question. They have a whole range of virtues which are not really opposite today, in the sense that in a democracy, one vote counts for another. Whereas, of course, the Zulu power in the past depended that one Zulu warrior was worth 5 of any other. Now that Zulu warrior may have the mental courage and the physical power. He still only has 1 vote. So we live at a time when, so it seems, nations with that type of virtue gets submerged. You know, like say the Prussians, the Macedonians in ancient history were never a numerous people, but they were a martial people. And the Zulus were, since the time of Chaka and Dingiswayo, and Shoshangani and Zongandaba and the other, they were definitely an adventurous, martial people, and it's hard for them to find a niche. And I mean, I just put whatever little energy I have into trying to help them. I always back losers, you know, too. I mean, all my life, I've never backed a winner. I back losers. I protect gorillas. I protect nature, which is shrinking. I oppose humans, which are advancing at the rate of 104 million every year increment of births. There's now 5.6 billion of us. I try to protect things which I know probably in the long term are going to lose. In fact, all 3 of us back losers. We try and protect South African wildlife. And, you know, this looks a long-term loser. The graph on every species, practically every species, is going down like that. If it ever turns, it's due to people like Dr. Player and Adrian Gardner here. And to a lesser degree to myself, that there was ever a turn, if it turns, but usually it doesn't turn. I mean, the black rhino won't exist here much longer in South Africa, or anywhere else for that matter. And, you know, I fight these causes, and it's very depressing to know that they're all losing causes. But I think it was Jung who said that a losing cause is the cause to fight. Because winning causes, thousands, millions of people fighting them. You know, human advancement, the increase of human population, human dominance, everybody's on that side, because that's the winning side. Just like everyone down here is for the ANC, no doubt. That looks the great winning side, 70% of the vote. Let's all be on a winner. But I prefer to be on the other side. It suits my nature.
Can I ask you not generating? You don't really get a return. Is it sound business principles to invest without getting your money back?
No, I don't think it is a sound business principle, but that's not what we're really discussing. Now, there are some game parks that make a lot of money. The Vatis parks, Londolozi, Malamala, which I believe belongs to Rattray, and there's one being started up called Pinda in Natal. These are out to make money, and I think they make money. But they're done in a certain way to attract loads of people. and provide the tourists with everything they can possibly want. Now, I mean, what Adrian is doing is a restoration of this country from scratch, from farms. I mean, it's already been practically ruined. It's been so degraded, he has to recover all this land. That's a vast extra expense. He could have found somewhere 25,000 acres in Africa, which was much more pristine than this near here, Port Elizabeth. So, I mean, he's not on a way. He can never make any money out of it. I think if he could break even, he'd fall down and pray to his ancestors. You know, if he could ever break even. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong in making money. Sometimes you can make money and have a park and do a lot of good. And even these game ranches, where people want to hunt, it's better to have a game ranch and some old Boer hunting on it, or American, or German. It's better that than to have just domestic stock ruining the land, goats and sheep and cattle. That's poison on the land. They destroy anything. They weren't meant for this part of the world. There wasn't one here 5,000 years ago. They're just animals that eat everything, you know. Whereas your natural bovids here, they all eat different. They eat different range. The dik-dik eats down here, the springbok eats up here, the giraffe eats up there, and they all eat different ranges, different plants, and different grasses, different legumes. Each one eats different things, so you can have an enormous head in terms of weight of protein on the land without destroying the land, but actually improving it, which is something no human being can ever do on a farm.
I'd like to just add to that as well, is that I think one of our major disadvantages of this area to try and get the revenue that one needs to be able to put back into this kind of industry is that to get recognition of this part of the world as a game area. Traditionally, anybody from overseas that comes to South Africa, the immediate draw is the Kruger, for obvious reasons. But what I'm trying to prove, and I had the pleasure of both Dr. Players and John's company the weekend, was that if there's any sort of research done into this area, I maintain that this should have been the Kruger. We've got a far bigger variety of animals that we can carry here, a far bigger carrying capacity, and certainly that far bigger range, because as John said earlier, you've got that variety of ecosystems here, which nowhere else, you probably won't find anywhere else in South Africa, maybe Phinda. But so certainly this has a potential. I have no doubt about that. And I think long term, I think I'm going to surprise John, is that I think there is going to be some sort of return here. But we first got to establish that this was a traditional area, and we're not trying to build a Jurassic Park here. This is a real thing. This is where the Big Five were first documented, was here. You think about it, the Cape Lion, the Cape Buffalo, the 11 elephant of Adder that were left after Pretorius had his go at knocking them all out, and the leopard and the black rhino. By 1870, man had knocked out the lion and the black rhino. They were gone. So 120 years later, there's a few of us trying to put them back.
I was just thinking, you know, it should cost a lot of money for the maintenance of your game reserve, so you must generate money.
Yeah, we do. We have a generating. Certainly, we do. We have the lodges are let out, but at this stage, the support is not nearly what it should be. So there's a massive marketing exercise to do to prove that point, that this was the real area in South Africa where the game was, and before man came in and destroyed it all. And not only the game. I think you were most surprised at what he'd done to the land.
Absolutely.
I mean, I showed you areas
Yes.
there where the goats had eaten off the trees to an umbrella height.
And the moment you leave your 25,000 acres, you see immediately degraded farmland. You see erosion and everything. And the moment you leave it, that's in 4 or 5 years it's regenerated. It can recover itself. There's one point I forgot to make, and that is that the cultural standpoint of all this, because humans are very homocentric in their cultural approbation. They only approve and love and will pay for things that human-made, human artifacts like paintings, sculptures, models, books, you know, and we tend to disregard the masterpieces of evolution, which are far more complicated and far finer models than anything can made by a human being. So therefore, culturally, it's very important to have these reserves where the original inhabitants of the country can survive, because they're masterpieces far greater than anything we've ever created or could create. All we've managed to do is through domestication of stock is mutilate fine original species. The wretched domestic cow and the modern goat is a pathetic replica of its ancestor. So we actually mutilate. Now here's somebody who's restoring culturally something that's vital, particularly to the Xhosa here. Now the Xhosa lived in these regions, and still do. Now in their culture, which is an ancient culture, these animals loom very large. There's scarcely an old tale that doesn't include a wild animal. Certainly their cousins up in the north, the Zulu. I mean, even the praise words of the kings today refer, always in animal terms, to the feats of the great ancestors. So when, for instance, King Cetshwayo drove the Boer farmers off the north bank of the Tokela, where they shouldn't have farmed. The agreement was south of the Tokela, and a few of them started, and he sent down some soldiers and drove them away. They describe that, the Hibonga, the praise man describes that today, when they're talking of the king, that his great ancestor, the black rhinoceros, drove the baboons from the river. That's how they put it. So in cultural terms, in the Nguni mind, these animals are right up front. The queen of the Zulus is called Ndlofokasi, the great she-elephant. The king himself is called Inganyama, the lion. Well, soon there won't be elephants or lions left, and they will be deculturalized. And they're fortunate to have these miraculous animals. And for instance, the Soto worshipped the blue crane. You know, they protected it. And before Christianity, all these different clans and tribes had different beliefs that their ancestors were in different species. So they were all conservationists. The best sort of conservation is you can't kill a crocodile because your ancestor's spirit is in it. And for instance, the Zulus believed that snakes and crocodiles, their ancestors' spirits lived on in them. And the Swazis believed they lived in cats, the Kololo in elephants. And this is a very fantastic way to conserve animals. There were pockets always where these animals were completely safe. And culturally, it's vital for the indigenous community here to have these animals kept in one piece in this area, because it's part of their past.
I think how we could attract interest for our wildlife conservation.
Well, now there are two words in the Nguni language which are very important, and as John Aspinall has said, in the Western culture, they've forgotten now as a result of so-called education. And the words are Ubuntu and Hlonipho. Ubuntu meaning compassion, and it's compassion not only for human to human, but compassion for the natural world. And that is what the early oral people of this country had. And then Hlonipho is respect, and again, it is respect for the natural world. And I mean, today is a very historic day, and all of us who are sitting here know it. And it is my hope, and certainly I believe, that the only way we're ever going to bind up the wounds of this nation is by paying far more attention to the natural world, and particularly the natural resources, which have been damaged in many places beyond repair. So the Eastern Cape really doesn't have very much beyond Port Elizabeth and its beaches. The only other real assets that it has been a place like Addo, and now Adrian Gardner has started the Shamwari, which is going to be, I believe, of enormous cultural and economic importance. And my prayer, if you like, is that for once this country, for once, will have a Minister of the Environment who will fight his colleagues if needs be and really do something about the extension of national parks, about the damaging consequences of overpopulation of domestic animals on watersheds, about the erosion that is taking place in the country no matter where one goes, about the pollution which is choking people to death. So we can get a minister with real courage and determination to start to tackle those things which are non-political, then we will make progress. And as far as the Eastern Cape is concerned, economically it will start to benefit the moment it starts to pay more attention to these assets that it has. And that needs government support. So that's the one side. The other side is that you're going to need a Minister of Tourism, and I don't have to tell you, in every government that we've ever had, the Minister of Tourism was always the last one in the pack, almost the joker.